I'm still trying to process what I discovered 6 weeks ago, and I honestly don't know if I should have opened that safety deposit box. What started as an unexpected $3,000 inheritance from a great aunt I barely knew has completely shattered everything I believed about my family's history. Some secrets are buried for good reasons, and I'm beginning to think this was one of them. My name is Emma Martinez. I'm 27, and I grew up believing my family came from a long line of honest, hardworking immigrants who built the American dream one generation at a time. My great-grandparents, Rosa and Miguel Santos, came to California from Mexico in 1952 with nothing but hope and determination. They worked in the fields, saved every penny, and eventually bought a small house in Fresno where they raised 5 children, including my grandmother Isabel. The family story was always about sacrifice, perseverance, and integrity. Rosa would say, La honestidad es nuestro único tesoro, honesty is our only treasure. Growing up, I heard endless stories about how they never took shortcuts, never compromised their values, never did anything they couldn't be proud of. It was a beautiful legacy that shaped how I saw myself and my place in the world. So when I got a certified letter from a law office in San Francisco saying I'd inherited something from my great-aunt Esperanza Santos Miller, I was more confused than excited. I'd met Esperanza maybe 3 times in my life, and she'd always been this mysterious figure who lived alone in the city and rarely came to family gatherings. The letter was formal and brief. Our client, Mrs. Esperanza Santos Miller, has passed away and named you as beneficiary of a small bequest totaling $3,147 and the contents of safety deposit box number 247 at First National Bank of San Francisco. Please contact our office to arrange transfer of these assets. $3,000 wasn't life-changing money, but as a recent college graduate with student loans, I wasn't going to turn it down. I called the law office and arranged to meet with the attorney, Mr. Gerald Chin, the following week. The first hint that something was unusual came during that meeting. Mr. Chin, an elderly man who'd apparently known Esperanza for decades, seemed nervous as he explained the inheritance. Your great-aunt was very specific about who should receive these items, he said, sliding a small brass key across his desk. She insisted it should be someone from the younger generation, someone who wouldn't have preconceived notions about the family history. What do you mean by preconceived notions? I asked. Mr. Chen's expression was carefully neutral. Mrs. Santos Miller believed that certain family stories had been simplified over the years. She wanted someone to know the complete truth. He handed me an envelope sealed with red wax. She asked me to give you this letter, but only after you've examined the contents of the safety deposit box. She was very clear about the order. I took the key and the sealed letter, feeling increasingly uneasy. Why all the mystery? What could possibly be in a safety deposit box that would require such elaborate precautions? 2 days later, I drove to San Francisco and met Mr. Chin at First National Bank. The safety deposit box was small, maybe 12 inches by 8 inches, but it was packed with items that made no immediate sense. The first thing I pulled out was a stack of photographs, old black and white pictures from what looked like the 1950s and 60s. Most showed my great-grandparents Rosa and Miguel, but they weren't the humble field workers I'd heard about. In these photos, they were dressed expensively, standing in front of nice cars, posing in what looked like upscale restaurants and hotels. Underneath the photos were documents I couldn't immediately understand. Bank statements from multiple accounts, all showing substantial deposits and withdrawals. Business licenses for something called Santos Import Company. Property deeds for warehouses in Los Angeles, San Diego, and Tijuana. But the most confusing item was a small leather journal filled with my great-grandfather Miguel's handwriting. The entries were in Spanish, and my Spanish isn't great, but I could make out enough to understand they were business records of some kind. Names, dates, amounts, locations, all meticulously documented.
At the bottom of the box was something that made my hands shake, a police report from 1967 with Miguel Santos listed as a person of interest in a federal investigation into drug trafficking along the Mexican border. I sat in that bank vault for over an hour, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The photos, The documents, the business records, they painted a picture of wealth and sophistication that contradicted everything I'd been told about my great-grandparents' humble beginnings. That evening, in my hotel room, I finally opened Esperanza's sealed letter. Her handwriting was shaky but clear. Mi querida Emma, if you are reading this, then you have seen the contents of the box and you are probably very confused. I am sorry to burden you with this knowledge, but someone in our family needs to know the truth before we are all gone. Rosa and Miguel Santos were not the simple farm workers your grandmother Isabel has always claimed. They were smugglers. Not just any smugglers. They ran one of the most successful drug and contraband operations on the West Coast from 1952 to 1968. The Santos Import Company was a front. They moved marijuana, cocaine, and heroin from Mexico into California using a network of warehouses, trucks, and corrupted border officials. They made millions of dollars, Emma. Millions. When the federal investigations started closing in 1967, they made a deal. Miguel provided information about competing drug operations in exchange for immunity and witness protection. The government helped them create new identities and histories, including the story about being poor field workers who saved up to buy their house. The money they used to buy that house, to raise their children, to send Isabel to college, it came from drugs. All of it. Isabel has never known the truth. Rosa and Miguel made me promise to never tell her. They wanted their children to grow up believing they came from an honest family. But the guilt has eaten at me for 50 years, Emma. Someone needs to know who we really are. The remaining money in Miguel's old accounts is yours now. Use it however you think is right. But please be careful who you tell. This knowledge could destroy our family. Your great-aunt, Esperanza, I read the letter 3 times before it fully sank in. My great-grandparents, the pillars of integrity I'd looked up to my entire life, had been drug dealers. Everything our family had built, every opportunity we'd been given, every advantage that had led to my college education and middle-class lifestyle, it all came from blood money. But there was more. The next morning, I drove to the Fresno County Library and started researching the Santos Import Company and the federal investigation Esperanza had mentioned. What I found made the situation even more complex and disturbing. In 1967, a rival drug operation had been violently dismantled by federal agents acting on intelligence provided by an anonymous source. 3 people had been killed in the raids, including a father of 4 who had been working as a truck driver for the competing operation. The newspaper articles didn't name the informant, but the timeline matched perfectly with Miguel's deal with the government. My great-grandfather hadn't just been a drug dealer. He'd been an informant whose information had gotten people killed.
I spent the next week in a haze, trying to figure out what to do with this information. Should I tell my grandmother Isabel, who was now 89 and had built her entire sense of family identity around her parents' supposed integrity? Should I tell my own parents, who had named their business Santos Family Construction in honor of their supposedly honest heritage? The decision was made for me when I returned home to Los Angeles and my grandmother noticed I'd been acting strangely. "Mija, you look like you've seen a ghost," she said during our weekly dinner. "What's wrong?" I couldn't look her in the eye. "Abuela, did you ever wonder how your parents could afford to buy that house in Fresno? Field workers in the 1950s didn't usually have that kind of money." Her face went very still. "What are you asking me, Emma?" "I'm asking if you think there might be parts of their story that maybe you didn't know about." Isabel set down her fork and stared at me for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Esperanza left you something, didn't she?" My heart stopped. "Abuela, did you know?" Tears started rolling down her cheeks. I suspected. For 60 years, I suspected. But I never wanted to know for sure. The conversation that followed was the most difficult of my life. Isabel told me about her childhood, about the expensive clothes that appeared in her closet, about the mysterious men who would visit the house late at night, about her father's frequent trips to Mexico that were never fully explained. "I knew something wasn't right," she said. "But your great-grandmother Rosa would get so angry if I asked questions. She would say, 'Some things are better left buried, Mija. We are building a new life, and the old life is dead.'" Isabel had spent her entire adult life trying to live up to an ideal that she suspected was false. She'd built her values, raised her children, and shaped our family's identity around the story of honest immigrants, all while harboring a secret fear that it was all a lie. "I'm sorry you had to learn this, Emma," she said. "I'm sorry Esperanza put this burden on you." But then she said something that changed my entire perspective on the situation. "But I'm also glad someone finally knows the truth." Carrying this suspicion alone for so many years, it's been like carrying a stone in my heart. Over the next few days, Isabel and I made a decision together. We would tell the immediate family, my parents, my Aunt Carmen, my Uncle Roberto, but we would keep it contained to our generation. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren didn't need to carry this burden. The family meeting was devastating. My father, who had built his entire business philosophy around Santos family integrity, went silent for 20 minutes after hearing the story. My Aunt Carmen started crying and didn't stop for an hour. My Uncle Roberto got angry, insisting it couldn't be true, that someone was trying to destroy our family's reputation. But slowly, they all began to process what it meant. The questions they'd never asked about family finances. The way Rosa and Miguel had always been vague about their early years in America. The mysterious relatives who would visit from Mexico but never stay long. The hardest part was deciding what to do with the money. The bank accounts Esperanza had left me contained $127,000, money that had been sitting untouched for decades, growing with interest. Money that came from drug trafficking and possibly contributed to people's deaths. After weeks of family discussions, we made a collective decision. We would donate the money to organizations that help families affected by drug violence and addiction. It wouldn't undo the harm our great-grandparents had caused, but it felt like the only way to honor the victims while acknowledging our family's complicated history. But here's the twist that still keeps me awake at night. 2 weeks after our family meeting, I got a call from a man named Detective Ray Morales from the LAPD. He said he'd been contacted by someone at First National Bank about unusual activity related to the Santos Import Company accounts. "Ms. Martinez," he said, "I need to ask you some questions about your family's business activities in the 1960s. It turns out that the federal investigation into Miguel Santos's operation had never been officially closed. When I'd accessed the safety deposit box and the old bank accounts, it had triggered alerts in a database that tracks cold cases related to organized crime." Detective Morales explained that law enforcement had been looking for Miguel Santos's financial records for decades, trying to trace money that had been stolen from legitimate businesses and identify other members of his organization who were never caught. "Your great-grandfather's journal that you found? It contains names and details about crimes that we've never been able to solve. People who disappeared, money that was never recovered, families who never got justice." I realized that by uncovering my family's secret, I had potentially opened a door that could lead to criminal charges against people who might still be alive. The journal didn't just document Miguel's crimes, it documented other people's crimes too. Detective Morales made it clear that I wasn't in any legal trouble, but he wanted access to the documents to help solve cold cases and potentially bring closure to families who had been waiting for answers for 50 years. This put me in an impossible position. Turning over the documents might help solve crimes and bring justice to victims, but it would also expose other families to the same devastating truth that had torn apart our family. It would turn Miguel's journal into evidence in criminal cases that could destroy lives and reputations decades after the fact. After consulting with a lawyer and talking it over with my family, we made the decision to cooperate with law enforcement. We turned over copies of all the documents, but we asked Detective Morales to be mindful of the impact on innocent family members who had nothing to do with crimes committed 50 years ago. The investigation is ongoing, and I can't share details about what they've found. But I can tell you that the journal has already helped solve 2 cold cases, including the disappearance of a man whose family has been looking for him since 1965. 6 weeks later, I'm still trying to come to terms with what this discovery has meant for my family and my sense of identity. The money I inherited, blood money, is being put to good use helping people affected by drug violence. The truth about our family history, as painful as it is, has actually brought us closer together by removing the burden of secrets and suspicions. But I think about Esperanza often and the choice she made to burden me with this knowledge. Was she right to reveal the truth? Would our family have been better off never knowing? What do we owe to the victims of crimes committed by people we loved, even if we never knew about those crimes? Most importantly, I think about all the families out there who might be living on foundations built by people who weren't who they claimed to be. How many immigrants' success stories are actually stories of crime and deception? How many family legends are actually elaborate cover ups? The hardest part is reconciling the great grandparents I thought I knew, Rosa with her sayings about honesty, Miguel with his supposed work ethic, with the people they actually were. Were they evil people who deceived their family? Or were they complicated people who made terrible choices, but genuinely tried to build something better for their children? I still don't have answers to those questions. But I've learned that family history is often much more complicated than the stories we tell ourselves. The people we admire may have done things we can't forgive. The money that built our opportunities may have come from sources that would horrify us. What would you do if you discovered that your family's success was built on crime? Would you want to know the truth, even if it meant losing the heroes you'd looked up to your entire life? And if you found evidence that could help solve crimes and bring justice to victims, would you turn it over even if it meant destroying other innocent families? Because these are the questions I'm living with now, and I honestly don't know if I made the right choices. The only thing I know for sure is that the truth, no matter how painful, is better than living with lies. But the cost of that truth is higher than I ever imagined it would be.